Adams County, Pennsylvania, September 4, 1866. 2:30 in the afternoon. James Wendell had been surveying for the federal government since before the war. He was 46 years old, thin in the way of men who worked outdoors in all weather and ate when the work allowed it. And he had spent 23 years measuring the ground, establishing boundaries, marking corners, filing plats with county recorders from Virginia to Minnesota. He was the kind of man who trusted instruments more than impressions, and who had learned, through 2 decades of professional practice, that the ground concealed things only until you were precise enough about what you were looking for. He was not given to imagination. He was given to fractions of an inch. In September 1866, he was engaged by the newly established Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association to conduct a systematic survey of the ground south and east of the Emmitsburg Road, the area designated for the first phase of monument placement. The work was methodical and slow. The ground was irregular from 3 years of weather working on disturbed soil, and the survey required him to establish benchmarks at close intervals before any measurement could be considered reliable. He was working with a chain and a transit and a notebook, and he had been at this particular section of ground for 11 days. He was driving a stake on the afternoon of September 4th when the hammer struck something solid at a depth of 22 inches. He did not immediately investigate. He recorded the location in his field notebook: 6 chains and 14 links north-northeast of the southwestern corner of the Hummelbaugh farm boundary. And he drove the stake 4 inches off the obstruction and noted in the margin that the subsurface showed an anomaly requiring investigation before monument placement. Then he took his probe rod, a steel shaft 3 feet long with a pointed tip, and he worked it down into the earth. The rod went into soft, disturbed soil, consistent with the whole area, and then stopped. The stop was not the stop of rock. It was the stop of something denser than rock. He knew the difference. He had been probing ground for 23 years, and the rod's behavior against stone was a vibration through the handle, a particular resistance that gave slightly as the tip found the grain of the rock. This resistance did not give. It absorbed the probe rod's pressure with a completeness he had not encountered in any material he had worked around before. He called his assistant, a 20-year-old named Marcus Pratt, who was in his first field season as a surveyor's helper, and told him to bring the spade. At 22 inches, they found the first one. The field Wendell was surveying had been the ground over which Pickett's charge crossed on the afternoon of July 3, 1863. In 3 years of post-battle activity, the ground had been worked repeatedly, by burial parties, by souvenir hunters, by families of the dead, by farmers attempting to restore agricultural use. The soil was dense with metal, fragments, buckles, bayonets, and Wendell had been cataloging battlefield debris since the survey began. What was at 22 inches was not battlefield debris. He cleared the soil from an area approximately 6 feet long and 18 inches wide. The clearing revealed 41 human skeletons in a tight single layer, each oriented with the skull to the west, each positioned with the arms along the body, each touching the next at the shoulder. They were not the remains of soldiers. The bones were too old. The soil in the layer below the skeletons, undisturbed soil, soil that had not been churned by the battle, showed none of the characteristics of the layer above. The skeletons were below the battle layer, in ground that had not been touched by the events of July 1863. Each skeleton had a blade, 41 blades, 1 per figure, positioned along the right side of each body from shoulder to hip. Wendell described them in his field notes as straight-edged, single-sided, approximately 30 inches in length, with a handle of dark material he could not identify. The blade metal was gray, not the gray of oxidized iron, a different gray, a gray that in the afternoon light had a quality he described, in the notes, as not reflective in the manner of worked metal, but internally consistent in color, as though the surface and the core are the same material. He ran his thumbnail along one blade. The edge did not yield. He ran a piece of paper from his notebook along a second blade. The paper divided cleanly. He had used sharp instruments for 23 years, and he understood without requiring a metallurgical vocabulary, that what he was holding was sharper than anything he had held before. He made his measurements: depth, orientation, bone condition, blade dimensions, and he covered the site, and he drove his monument stake 4 inches from it, and he went back to his camp and sat for a considerable time before he wrote the site description into his field notes. James Wendell filed a complete survey report with the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association in November 1866. The report is on record at the Adams County Historical Society. It does not mention the burial site. A separate supplementary document, a single folded sheet in Wendell's hand, attached to the inside cover of the field notebook, does mention it. The document is addressed to no one specifically and reads as a note to himself. The location, the depth, the count of 41, the blade characteristics, and a final line. Material resists all ordinary tools. Suggest removal prior to monument placement. The word removal is underlined. The monument at the location designated by Wendell's survey, a bronze marker placed in 1867, sits 6 feet from the location he recorded for the burial site. The site itself has never been excavated in any recorded archaeological program. The Gettysburg National Military Park's archaeological inventory, which covers more than 5,000 recorded sites on park land, does not include the location Wendell described. A comparison of the inventory's coverage of the southern Emmitsburg Road corridor with Wendell's 1866 survey coordinates produces a gap of approximately 40 square feet around the location he marked. The gap is not explained in the inventory documentation. The Adams County Historical Society's copy of Wendell's field notebook was deposited by the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association in 1919, along with a collection of other survey documents. The deposit record notes that the notebook was transferred with some pages removed at the direction of the Bureau of American Ethnology. The number of pages removed is not recorded. The removed pages are not in the Historical Society's archive. The supplementary folded sheet survived the 1919 removal because it was attached to the inside cover and was overlooked, or because whoever directed the removal decided that 11 lines describing a construction obstacle were not significant enough to require extraction. That decision was wrong. The 11 lines are the only first-person account of the discovery in existence. The metallurgical impossibility of what Wendell described sits at the intersection of 2 physical facts that do not resolve against each other. The first is the blade's edge, sharp enough to divide paper cleanly after an indeterminate period in acidic Pennsylvania soil. The second is the blade's surface resistance, the quality Wendell noticed with his thumbnail, the quality that caused him to write, "resists all ordinary tools." No metal known to the civilizations of North America in the period that the soil stratigraphy assigns to the burial layer, a minimum of 3,000 years before the 1866 excavation, placing manufacture no later than approximately 1100 BC, could have been produced with these combined characteristics. Iron, which was not independently produced in North America prior to European contact, rusts in acidic soil at a rate that would render any blade 3,000 years old unrecognizable. Copper, which was worked in North America as early as 5,000 years ago, does not maintain a cutting edge after 3,000 years in soil, regardless of initial quality. The closest material analogy for the combination of edge retention and surface resistance Wendell observed is a class of high-nickel iron alloys, whose production requires temperature control and metallurgical knowledge not documented anywhere in North America before the mid-19th century. The closest global parallel is the Damascus steel tradition of the medieval Islamic world, whose production method was lost in approximately the 18th century and whose recreation has occupied metallurgists in the modern period without complete success. The parallel is not a source argument, it is a technical argument. A blade that cuts paper cleanly after 3,000 years in the ground was made by a process that does not exist in the archaeological record of North America. The process existed somewhere. The blade was made by it. The blade ended up in Adams County, Pennsylvania. The 41 figures were warriors. This conclusion is not a speculation. It is a material inference from the consistent blade placement. One blade per figure, positioned along the right side from shoulder to hip, in the orientation of a sheathed weapon carried by a right-handed individual. The arrangement is a unit burial, not a scattered population burial. 41 individuals, each armed in the same way, in a tight organized layer, all oriented with skulls to the west, all touching at the shoulder. This is a formation burial. The blade placement is functional, not symbolic. These were weapons intended for use by the people interred with them, placed according to a convention that no documented North American archaeological culture employed with this combination of material quality and burial organization. The economic dimension of the Gettysburg case operates differently from the mine closure suppression pattern. There was no profitable operation to shut down. The suppression interest was reputational and institutional. The Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association had been established with the explicit purpose of creating a national memorial to the Union dead, a purpose that required the ground to be understood as a site defined entirely by the events of July 1863. The discovery of a pre-Columbian burial complex on the intended memorial ground complicated that definition in a way the association's founders were not prepared to accommodate. A memorial site containing not only the remains of Union soldiers, but also the remains of a culture that predated the battle by 3,000 years, and whose warriors were buried with blades that no known metallurgical tradition can explain, is not a site whose management the Battlefield Association had the institutional framework to handle in 1866. The simplest resolution, remove the supplementary pages, decline to publicize the find, proceed with monument placement, was also the resolution that preserved the association's institutional coherence. The National Park Service's ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted between 2001 and 2008 as part of the park's rehabilitation program documented an anomaly at 20 to 24-inch depth at a location consistent with Wendell's survey coordinates. The survey report describes this anomaly as possible buried metal concentration, origin undetermined. The report is dated 2008. No significance determination has been filed for this anomaly as of the most recent administrative review. The park's Cultural Resource Management Protocol requires a significance determination before excavation. The protocol has not been initiated. The determination process has not been initiated. The anomaly is in the report. The report is on file. The significance determination is not. The ground surface above the site is maintained as open historic landscape. There is a mown grass path 7 feet from the anomaly's location. On summer weekends, visitors stand near the bronze marker placed in 1867 in considerable numbers. They read the marker. They take photographs of the ground. 22 inches below where they stand, the blades are still in the same orientation Wendell found them, still touching the same long bones they were placed beside 3,000 years before he drove his stake in the wrong spot. The paper dividing edge has been in that ground through every winter since Wendell covered it back up on the afternoon of September 4, 1866. He noted the obstacle and proposed removal and moved his stake 4 inches and filed his report, and died in Lancaster in 1891 and never mentioned it again. The ground-penetrating radar found the metal concentration in 2008. The significance determination has not been filed. The blades are still sharp. Wendell demonstrated that in 1866, and nothing in the subsequent 160 years has changed the metallurgy. The deeper context of the burial layer's composition requires a framework that the Battlefield Association did not have in 1866. And that the National Park Service does not apply today, because applying it would require acknowledging what is in the ground beneath the monument grass. The 41 figures oriented skull to west, arranged touching at the shoulder, each right-armed with a blade of identical specification, represent a military formation burial of a kind that appears in the global archaeological record in 2 distinct traditions: the Etruscan warrior burials of northern Italy, dated from approximately the 8th to the 3rd century BC, in which fallen soldiers were interred in organized rows with weapons positioned in functional orientation, and the late Shang Dynasty warrior burials of northern China, dated from approximately 1200 to 1000 BC, in which military units were interred in formation with bronze weapons beside them. Neither tradition has any documented presence in Adams County, Pennsylvania. Both traditions share the specific burial practice: organized formation, functional weapon placement, skull orientation, that Wendell documented at 22 inches. The practice is not random, it is cultural. A culture practiced it. That culture buried 41 of its warriors in what is now the southern Emmitsburg Road corridor, at a date the stratigraphy places no later than 1100 BC. The precise location of the burial site can be reconstructed from Wendell's surviving field notes with enough specificity to conduct targeted ground-penetrating radar confirmation of the metal concentration's dimensions. The notes record the bearing and distance from the Hummelbaugh Farm boundary corner with the exactness that 23 years of federal survey work produced. 6 chains and 14 links north-northeast, to a tolerance of plus or minus half a link. A link is approximately 8 inches. Half a link is approximately 4 inches. The burial site is locatable to within 4 inches of its actual position using Wendell's field notes and the surviving Hummelbaugh Farm boundary record, which is on file at the Adams County Recorder of Deeds. The National Park Service has access to Wendell's survey file through the Adams County Historical Society. It has access to the Hummelbaugh boundary record through the county recorder. It has access to the 2008 ground-penetrating radar survey report through its own resource management division. 3 documents, all accessible, collectively pointing to a specific location within 4 inches. The significance determination has not been filed. The Gettysburg case has one additional institutional dimension that the standard treatment of the find omits entirely. The Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, which commissioned Wendell's survey in 1866, was succeeded by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's management of the battlefield in 1895, which was in turn succeeded by the Federal War Department's management in 1895, which was in turn succeeded by the National Park Service's management in 1933. Through all 4 management transitions, spanning 67 years from the discovery to the Park Service's assumption of control, the supplementary note remained in the field notebook, and the field notebook remained in the Adams County Historical Society's collection. The 1919 removal of pages from the notebook, which occurred under the Federal War Department's administration of the battlefield, is the only documented attempt to manage the Wendell record. It removed the wrong document. It removed the pages describing the site in detail and left the 11-line supplementary note that describes it in summary. The summary is sufficient to locate the site. The pages would have been sufficient to fully document it. The removal succeeded in preventing full documentation and failed to prevent location. The bronze marker placed in 1867 is 6 feet from the eastern edge of the burial layer. James Wendell placed it 6 feet from the layer because the supplementary note says, "Suggest removal prior to monument placement." And the removal did not happen, and the monument was placed anyway, at 6 feet, because 6 feet was close enough to the obstruction to make the stake point optimal for the monument line, while avoiding the obstruction itself. The monument marks, by its placement, the approximate location of what lies below it. The visitors who stand near the bronze marker and photograph the field are 6 feet from the blades. 22 inches below the grass. The ground-penetrating radar found the metal concentration. The significance determination has not been filed. Wendell suggested removal in 1866 and meant removal of the obstacle, not removal of the record. But the record was partially removed in 1919, and the obstacle was not removed then or since. The obstacle is still there. The supplementary note describing it is still there. They have been there simultaneously for 158 years, waiting for someone to file the significance determination that connects them. James Wendell filed the supplementary note as an attachment to his field notebook on the same day he filed his main survey report with the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association in November 1866. The note was written on paper from his standard field notebook, folded once and attached to the inside front cover with a pin whose rust mark is still visible in the Historical Society's copy. This was not a filing method Wendell used for routine survey notes. A review of the Adams County Historical Society's holdings from Wendell's other survey work in the Mid-Atlantic region shows standard binding and tabulation for all routine documentation. The folded, pin-attached format appears only in the Gettysburg supplementary note. He treated this document differently from his routine work. He separated it from the main report deliberately, as though he understood that what it described would require separate handling from what the report contained. The main report describes a survey completed in professional form. The supplementary note describes something that does not fit in a professional survey report. Wendell put each document in the appropriate container and submitted both. The main report survived intact through 1919. The supplementary note survived intact through 1919 and through every year since. The pages removed in 1919, those that describe the burial layer in the detail that a professional field notebook requires, are gone. The summary survived because summaries look like construction notes. 11 lines describing an obstacle and its suggested resolution look like a contractor's marginal annotation. To anyone reading quickly, looking for the detailed field description of an anomalous pre-Columbian burial site, the folded sheet looks like a note about a foundation obstruction. The 1919 review team found the detailed description and removed it. They did not find the summary. Both documents are necessary to locate and identify the site. One is in the Historical Society. One is in the federal record that the 1919 review team created by removing it from the Historical Society's collection and that the federal record has not acknowledged since. Marcus Pratt, the 20-year-old assistant who brought the spade on the afternoon of September 4, 1866, gave a brief account of the discovery to a journalist in Lancaster in 1897, 31 years after the survey. The account, published in a single column in the Lancaster Intelligencer on July 14, 1897, describes the clearing of the burial layer in terms consistent with Wendell's field notes and adds one detail not present in any surviving documentation. Pratt said that when the crew covered the layer back with soil, Wendell stood at the edge of the covered site for a long moment before speaking. What he finally said to Pratt was not about the blades. It was about the arrangement. He said the figures were placed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. He said it in the specific tone, Pratt recalled, of a man who had spent his career measuring the work of others and who had just measured something whose precision he could not account for. Then Wendell drove his stake 4 inches from the edge of the layer and went back to his survey. He was a federal contractor. His job was to prepare the ground for monuments. He prepared it. The monument was placed. The blades are still 22 inches below the path. The 2008 radar survey confirmed the metal concentration. The significance determination has not been filed. The paper Wendell ran along the blade's edge on the afternoon of September 4, 1866, the page from his field notebook, was the last thing that divided cleanly against the blade in any documented human encounter with it. The blade is still there at 22 inches in Adams County, Pennsylvania, in the darkness below the grass that visitors walk on during summer weekends when they come to read the bronze marker placed in 1867. The final witness in the Gettysburg case is not a deathbed confessor or a whistleblower. It is an instrument. The ground-penetrating radar unit that swept the southern Emmitsburg Road corridor in 2008 is a device that produces no agenda, serves no institution, and carries no motive for fabrication. It found a metal concentration at 20 to 24-inch depth at a location that Wendell's field notes describe with 4-inch accuracy. The radar unit's output is a data file in the National Park Service's Resource Management Division. The data file says there is metal at that depth at that location. The significance determination process says nothing because it has not been initiated. The radar and the field notes agree. The field notes say the metal is blades. The radar says the metal is still there. Neither document has been refuted. Neither document has been acted upon. They sit in their respective archives. The field notebook in Towanda at the Adams County Historical Society. The radar data file at the Parks Resource Management Division, pointing at the same spot from different sides of 142 years. James Wendell was 46 years old when he pressed his thumbnail against the edge of a blade that had been in the ground for 3,000 years and felt the edge not yield. He was a man who trusted his instruments. His thumbnail was his instrument that afternoon, in the absence of anything more precise, and it told him what it told him, and he wrote it down with the same exactness he brought to every measurement. Material resists all ordinary tools. 7 words. In a folded sheet attached to the inside cover of a field notebook, pinned there in November 1866. The pin left a rust mark that is still visible. The note is still attached. The blade is still at 22 inches. The edge is still there. Nothing that has happened in the 158 years since Wendell covered the burial back up has changed what the blade is made of, or what it will do to the next piece of paper someone runs along its edge. James Wendell was 46 years old on the afternoon of September 4, 1866, when he pressed his thumbnail against the edge of a blade that had been in the ground for 3,000 years and felt it not yield. He was a man who trusted his instruments. His thumbnail was his instrument that afternoon, in the absence of anything more precise, and it told him what it told him, and he wrote it down in 7 words. Material resists all ordinary tools. Then he covered the layer back with soil and drove his monument stake 4 inches from the edge and went back to his survey. He had 23 years of training for that kind of measurement. He had no training for what to do with the result. He submitted the supplementary note in November 1866. He died in Lancaster in 1891. The note is still attached to the inside cover of his field notebook in the Adams County Historical Society, pinned there with a pin whose rust mark is still visible on the paper. 6 feet from the bronze marker placed in 1867, 22 inches below the grass that visitors walk on during summer weekends. The ground-penetrating radar found the metal concentration in 2008. The significance determination has not been filed. The blade is still at 22 inches. The edge has not changed. Wendell demonstrated that in 1866 and nothing in the 158 years since has changed the metallurgy. The paper divided cleanly. It will still divide cleanly. The hand that runs the next sheet along that edge will be the first hand to touch it since the afternoon James Wendell stood at the edge of the layer and understood that what he was measuring had not been made by anyone whose work he had measured before.